Fake TV. You are watching the Lost Begotten Fake TV channel. I'm your host, Fake TV's Lost Begotten. How about that shit? Today, oh yes, I'm still binge watching the weather. There in Houston, where I lived for damn near a decade. Possibly more than a decade. I really haven't ever just totaled it up how much time I've actually lived in Houston. So it appears they're just doing interviews at this point there at the convention center. Really, dog? Really? The dog, my dog, bless his heart, lays back there and does nothing all damn day until I start a broadcast. Then he comes and just stands right by me and starts scratching himself. That's always entertaining. Because I don't got enough shit stressing me out. That fucking 11-year-old mutt. She wants to be an asshole. But I love him. He's my dingo puppy. So tonight I'm going to be putting on a couple of very interesting news stories. And I'd like to first get off of here and just scroll through some of the more recent coverage. Let me make sure I hit this up so it gets in my history there. There's the Fox channel that's actually supposed to be up, functioning once again. But as you can see, Megastorm Harvey. It's kind of 3 storms in one there, isn't it? It's all over the place. It's still where it was, but there's like, I mean, look at that. There's like 2 more fucking hurricanes just spinning them. It's like one nor'easter, well, summertime land hurricane. Look, there's a land hurricane up there over Michigan and Indiana. Wow. And then there's another tropical storm forming off the coast of South Carolina right there. And those basically just came from the moisture of this storm. That's pretty crazy. So anyways, looks like they're doing a weather report here on Fox 26, another local Houston station. So let's check in with them. If my TV remote works.
Looking pretty good right now. I see we kind of give you quite a bit of information. I hope you're able to take that and use that. I'm not happy to say that I don't have a lot of positive things as far as what I'm going to be talking about here in the next couple of minutes on what the weather is doing right now. We're going to focus on the rain that is falling
And
right
sound.
now. Even where it's not falling at the moment, there's some serious situations and water is causing all sorts of problems. But it's because of the water that's already on the ground. These counties that are right along our coast are who are seeing the rain falling at the moment, and that's where we're going to see some problems being more created in the short term. National Weather Service has been keeping us up to date with flash flood warnings, tornado warnings at times. We don't have any tornado warnings at the moment, but we're still in that zone that we could see some here within the next 24 to 48 hours across the Houston area. As again, that might be one bright spot that mentions at the moment we don't have any tornado warnings. The flash flood warnings are going to be associated with these showers and storms that are rolling in off the coast right now. I think we're focusing mostly on Brazoria County, Galveston County, Chambers County, and definitely a little bit of the southeastern portions of Harris County. The warning itself does include more counties than what I just mentioned, but I think those are the primary areas in which we're seeing that heaviest rainfall amount. So yes, Liberty County, a little bit of Montgomery County, Fort Bend County, even a portion of Matagorda County are included in what the National Weather Service has sent out as a flash flood warning. So if you're in those areas, that's where, because of rain that is currently falling, might cause some more problems. So if you're not having any water in the roadways, at least the last couple of hours, this might put some water in the roadways that could create some problems. I'm hopeful that you're not considering leaving where you are right now if you were in a relatively safe spot, because this is going to be one of those situations at night where we just don't want you moving around. Although there are some specific neighborhoods in which evacuations are being encouraged, and we'll continue to keep you updated on those in just a few minutes. I'm going to focus on the rain that's falling across the area right now, and it is primarily on those coastal counties. We're looking at 1 to 2 inches per hour on those rainfall rates, and overall we're looking at a possibility in the next 24 hours or so to see 10 or more inches of rain in certain spots. And it's all one of those situations where it's just falling too fast for to get to the runoff, to get to those bayous and those creeks. And those bayous and creeks are already full, if not out of their banks. And so it's sort of taking a very long time to get that out of the way. Now, for the northern parts of our viewing area, we're talking about Walker County, most of Montgomery County, Trinity County, Polk County, St. Jacinta County. You're looking at lighter rains. There is definitely some steadier rains, but it's a little bit light to moderate rains. It's not those heavier rains that some of us are seeing along the coast. So not officially in any of these flash flood warnings. Those are going to kind of be to the south. But still, because of, again, the saturated ground and the filled bayous and everything that are up there, not the time that we're going to really be needing to get out and explore, especially in the evening. But even tomorrow morning, I would caution you to decide to explore much. So tropical storm Harvey, it's currently a tropical storm out in the Gulf of Mexico, and that's where we don't want to see it. That's where it thrives a little bit. It has the ability to recharge and to energize and to maybe even grow stronger the longer as the center circulation remains out over water. So what we're wanting to see is Harvey to exit our area away from Houston just in general, but also once it gets back over land, that's when we'll see the weakening begin to take place even more, and that's when it'll have a lot more difficult time creating these heavier storms that are rolling in off of the coast. So I want to look at some of the computer models just to kind of show you the idea of what's happening here. We are expecting it within the next 24 hours to really begin to take a northeasterly track and maybe even speed up a little bit towards the end of that 24-hour period. And the next 12 hours or so, we're still crawling. We're not going to have a lot of movement to it, and that's not helping us at all either. We need to get that movement back to it. So here's the official forecast track from the National Hurricane Center. I'll start with what's happening at the moment. Kind of hard to read one of our lines here between our monitors. The movement is at 5 miles an hour. That's the number that I really want to see speed up a little bit. What I don't want to see any higher is the maximum sustained winds at 45 miles an hour. Some of us have shared with me, as we talked about social media, the fact that there's just been more wind today, whereas the last couple of days it hasn't been very much wind, and that's because the center of that circulation hasn't been really very close to us, and it hasn't been over water. But when it is over water, able to kind of gain that more strength, and that includes the wind speed. So as it stays over water, wind will be a little bit of a factor. Maybe not damaging winds, but not helpful winds by any means as well. So let's kind of keep that in mind. I'm going to talk about the track now a little bit. This current, the first icon here is the emblem is showing the current position, the 1 a.m. position. 7 p.m. this evening. Look how long it's going to take to make this distance from 1 a.m. to 7 p.m. That crawl continues to take place. But the next jump that we see is just Wednesday at 7 p.m. So in a 24-hour period, you're going to see more distance covered. That momentum, that movement's going to speed up, and that's going to be great. And especially Wednesday, when it gets back over land, the center of Harvey gets back over land. That's when we're going to see general weakening, and then it can move off and probably become a depression at that point in time. So this is just one of our computer models, what it thinks is going to happen, and you're going to see again slow improvement. This is a 36-hour model, so really towards the end of the 24-hour period, when we're starting to look into the past 24 hours, that's when I think improvements are going to take place. But we're definitely going to deal with some rainfall, continuing rainfall, which will sort of, again, encourage that flooding across our area is going to be taking place in the overnight hours and even then some. So you see the winds rotating around the center. I'll put this into motion for us, and as we move through time a little bit, you'll see that center continuing to track, just like the forecast showed us, the Hurricane Center's forecast. And now you'll begin to see, as we get a little bit further on, this is going to be about noon today, notice where the oranges and yellows are here, right across the Houston area. As we move a little bit further through time, you're going to begin to see it begin to retreat a little bit further away, slowly to our northeast, slowly taking those heavier storms with it. But there's still plenty of heavy rains out there, but again, slowly kind of moving away. We're now at Wednesday at lunchtime, definitely looking at the center of rotation back over land, back decreasing in its strength as we move a little bit further on. So for tonight, here's what we're talking about, kind of to wrap things up and to outline all this for us. We're still looking at that steady rain, particularly for our coastal counties. That's where we could see more problems begin to develop directly related to rainfall. Now, again, there's a lot of other areas out there that are dealing with flooding and are dealing with forced mandatory evacuations, but all of that has to do with water that's already on the ground. So the newer areas, or the increasing areas because of the rainfall, are right now confined to the coast. We're still looking at more winds becoming a bit of a problem. Our roadways are still one in which that we're just not encouraging anybody to get out on. In just a moment, we're going to get an update from Coco Dominguez as far as what we're seeing currently. And yes, the rivers and bayous, this is going to be a slow transition, because what happens is you have a flooding event that's created because of the rain that's falling at the moment. And then that rain, once that water that gets on the ground, it eventually gets to our drainage system, those creeks and those bayous and the rivers, and they become overwhelmed. And so sort of we're transitioning towards that, but we're not quite there yet. We're now in an area where both are problems. The current rain's a problem, as well as the rivers are a problem. And eventually that becomes just more or less a drainage problem. And then eventually that kind of gets back under control. That takes a while, though. And as we're watching Harvey, everything's associated with Harvey and tropical storm at the moment. And eventually we're getting that moved off of the coast, along the coast. And then that, once it gets back over land, that's when we're going to see those improved conditions. All right, I mentioned Coco Dominguez. She's ready to go over there. Give us an update on what we're seeing right now on the roadways.
Thanks a lot, JB. Let's go ahead and take a look right now. Still very dangerous conditions out there. This is the Houston Live Transtar shot. 45 north at Cypresswood. I just saw somebody coming in the southbound.
Oh, look, it's the traffic report.
Northbound, completely submerged underwater, although the water has gone down a little bit in certain parts of the city, not everywhere. And it's not safe to travel at nighttime with this weather like this. So let's go ahead and go to another different shot. This is the 45 north at Spring Cypress. We have a police unit here just ready to make sure that you do not get through. There's dangerous conditions up ahead in this part of the town. So we'll go take another look now. 45 north and Spring Cypress is what we're looking at right now. Houston Transtar 225, LaPorte at Ritchie. So just a lot of wet roads, wet ground, still a lot of ponding on the roadways. Still very dangerous. Things are getting a little better, but you see the winds kind of blowing the water there. That's what we're seeing through a lot of the Houston area still. We'll go now to another Transtar 45 Gulf and El Dorado.
All right. So yeah, local Houston weather from Fox 26. Got me thinking. There was several instances today in which I heard the phrase forced evacuation. Now, I don't want to be an Alex Jonesy or anything, but man, blocking off I-10 at Lake Charles to keep people from going into Texas seems a bit extreme to me. I just don't even get that. I mean, obviously the flooding's really bad, but I mean, some people could just be driving out there to rescue their relatives. And then you got forced evacuations, not just mandatory evacuations. There's been, like, that guy just, like, said forced and then, like, switched himself over to mandatory evacuations. That seemed kind of suspicious. Anyways. So I'm going to check back in with KHOU, see how they're faring over there.
Tonight, the runs from last night. So this is a huge improvement over that. Huge improvement. The thought of getting another 15 inches on top of what we just had just boggles the mind. Okay, so that's the rainfall forecast for tonight through 9 a.m. Not terrible, not what we want, but not terrible. Now let's look at the forecast from the Hurricane Center. Winds. So the spin is here. This is where Harvey is down sort of Surfside. Now this is a wind forecast. So let's move this forward in time. And that circulation kind of moves up the coast. We could have gusts to 50 in Galveston. Could have gusts to 35 or 40 in Pearland and Houston and Chambers County as well. The purple areas here. Southeast Harris County, Galveston County, Chambers County, Liberty County, you're included in that. And then over toward Beaumont, you could have gusts to 30, 40, maybe 50 in brief. But the soil is so saturated that the roots and some of the trees may not be able to hold it down. They would go. So this is a perfect look at our power outage threat for tonight into tomorrow morning. The brighter purples, you have a little higher power outage threat. The reds and yellows, it begins to get into a little lower power outage threat. But that's a perfect way to look at this particular forecast model with the circulation of Harvey sitting right there off the coast. Okay, now let's look at the computer forecast from the National Hurricane Center. And there's Harvey now. So click it once, we push forward in time. And here we are with the storm sitting south of Galveston by tomorrow evening. So it's still kind of in a bad spot for us tomorrow evening. That being said, you saw the computer runs which are suggesting, even though it's still in kind of a bad spot for us, a lot of the moisture and the rain is offshore. So we'll watch and see if that'll verify for us. So we move forward in time. And the storm is here Wednesday morning. So Tuesday night to Wednesday morning, between those two time periods, the storm moves from a bad spot for us to a much better spot for we here in southeast Texas. This is not a good spot for Beaumont, Lake Charles, and central Louisiana, and they may have flooding rains out of this. In fact, they likely will. But we deserve a break at this point, so we'll take it. So that's where it goes by Wednesday morning. So between Tuesday night and Wednesday morning, we should see huge improvement. And then we go ahead and move forward in time, and it moves up into central Louisiana. And again, this is a flood threat for Louisiana, and then it will continue on up into the the upper Midwest states. Go ahead and click it, and up into the upper Midwest it goes. And look, this is going to be a flood threat for Memphis and Nashville and Cincinnati. Even though it weakens to just a remnant low, it's going to have all that tropical moisture.
Not going there.
Meteorologists at all the TV stations right now up in Shreveport, in Little Rock, in Memphis, and Louisville, and into Ohio and Cincinnati and St. Louis, they're like, hey, we're watching this, and we have a flood threat, but at least it looks like it's going to be skipping along. So it'll move. Maybe they'll only get 10 inches instead of 40 to 50 like we've gotten in some spots. Let's see if the extended forecast updated correctly for me. Yeah. So today is Tuesday. We've got the rain threat. Wednesday, we should see significant improvement. I haven't wiped out the rain chance completely, but significant improvement on Wednesday. And then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Looks like even into Monday and Tuesday, we're going to see huge improvement and a chance to dry out. So that's the way all the meteorology of it stands right now. And I mentioned this earlier, how I was convinced that Allison in 01 would be the worst flood disaster that I've ever seen or would ever seen. I had never seen anything like it. It scared me. This one clearly has been an order of magnitude worse than Allison. And guys, after Allison, Harris County Flood Control put out some information. They did a big study. You can find it online. It's the Tropical Storm Allison Recovery Project, which is a wonderful resource. Just if you want to know more about how we try to control floods in Harris County. Tropical Storm Allison Recovery Project. And one of the titles of the pieces was, this one is off the charts. Well, now we have another one, which is even further, much further off the charts, guys.
I hope what it means, David, in the future, and there's no way to predict that we won't see this for a generation.
Well, let me tell you. So let me tell you what it means, because we've just been through it. It means it's going to happen again. I don't know when, but if it happens, it can happen again. And so when the Allen brothers founded this city in the at the turn of the century, they went through some horrible floods. They probably had some landfalling tropical storms, and they knew they had a problem. So one of their marketing campaigns was to try to sell people on the idea that the area had abundant spring water and it was good for your health. But as we know, it can be terrible for the things that man the cities and infrastructure that we try to do to make a city and have a wonderful community.
Yeah, it's been tough. It's been rough. The often quoted phrase, "We shall overcome," I think is appropriate. It's going to take some time. It's not going to be easy, but we shall and we will.
We will. We will. We have some updated numbers on power outages coming to us from CenterPoint. They have 97,500 people without power, and earlier at 6 o'clock, we had gotten the numbers of 100,000.
Yeah.
So they're making progress, although be it slow. They are getting support, linemen from other cities coming in, and hopefully, as we see improvements in the weather, more people will be able to get in. They're working around the clock to restore power to those communities that they can. We'll continue to monitor that. Want to share something with you now, a tweet that we found. People want to help in any way possible, and that includes people from all different parts of the country. Familiar face, especially if you're a music fan, DJ Khaled has posted this on his Twitter page. It says, "Houston, Texas, my prayers are with you. I just sent 25,000 your way to help all the families in need." He has the prayer emoji, and it says, "At Kevin Hart for real," that's Kevin Hart, the superstar actor, "I accepted your challenge." So obviously Kevin Hart is asking people to step up. Kevin Hart has been to Houston many times, so I'm sure he is feeling our pain and wanting to help us. And I think we're just going to see more of this.
Yeah.
And we've seen it with our professional sports teams, some of the athletes personally. And, it's going to take all of the outside support that we can get. That's for sure.
It's a cute kid, by the way.
Very cute.
Very
yeah,
happy.
it makes us smile right now.
Here we are. It's almost 1:30 in the morning. Our Grace White is down in Fort Bend County. They've had all kinds of problems with various evacuations, some voluntary, some not. Grace, what's the situation right now?
Well, Lynn and Mia, we are close to the Brazos River, still west of 99 in Fort Bend County. Believe it or not, it's still raining out here. We just ran into some volunteers that just got into town from San Antonio. They are bringing their boats into town, hoping to get up and running in the morning to help out rescues in this area. Dustin, tell me first, just what was the drive in from San Antonio like?
Well, it was like you would expect that you see on the radar. I mean, we got it hit real hard in San Antonio. All three of us, me, Jason, and Christian, we all live in Floresville, southeast of San Antonio. We got hit hard there, but nothing like this. So it was clear pretty much until we got to Cuero, and then it started to hit pretty hard, and came on into kind of this area that we're at in Fort Bend County right now, and it's been pretty steady so far.
Yeah, I was curious how you ended up here because, most people think, I-10 when they think Houston to San Antonio travel, but you said you couldn't go down I-10 completely to Houston. That's why you ended up here. How did you get here?
Well, we know some people from this area, and the Brazos is just right over here. The Brazos is about to be the highest that it's ever been. And so we're all in the cattle business back in San Antonio. We have some cattle neighbors that are in this area that needed help and said that there were people that needed help by boat, and that's why we came to pick this area. Also because the way we had to come into San Antonio, come into Houston, this was the only way we could get in because I-10 and everything north of us is shut down, and that'd be hopeless.
You had to go back roads.
That's right. Yeah, we had to go backwards all the way to get here.
What was it about this storm that made you say, I got to get up, I got to do something?
Well, mainly the boat side of it. I mean, I've been at work the past couple of days and was sitting at home with my wife thinking, man, I wish I could do something. And then my business partner and I today were talking about how often do you get a chance to help this many people, and may never have that kind of opportunity again. We both have the kind of boats that are needed so that's why we came.
Yeah, and hopefully you can kind of see the boats are here behind us. They towed in basically from San Antonio. You and your friends got 2 boats, 2 trucks. It's that simple, and here you are, hoping to get up and running in the morning. And we have seen it all day. 4,000 rescues in this county alone, just Fort Bend County. It's incredible. And we were out actually doing some boat rescues earlier today. It was just the images are just jaw dropping. Any idea of what time you'll get going in the morning? What your plan is?
Yeah, so when we got here, we put some notices out on the internet, and within 5 minutes, we started getting calls back immediately of people needing help. Unfortunately, a lot of them were on the northeast side of Houston, too far away, but immediately we got as a response from somebody here in this area that we're going to meet at daylight in the morning, that they need rescues up and down the Brazos River, so that's what we're doing probably all day tomorrow.
Well, let me, as we send it back to you in the studio, yeah, we put that call out for help on Twitter and Facebook, hoping to connect people who need help with these guys. And again, they've been able to connect with that other boat rescue group. So hopefully these guys will be up and running in the morning as the rain continues to fall, Lenemia, and we're all watching out here at the Brazos River in Fort Bend County. Back to you in the studio.
Got it. Grace, thanks so much for the information. The Brazos River.
So, some interesting developments. Earlier, Kira had mentioned, my wife, a couple of members of the Cajun Navy got shot at. People were trying to take their boats in one of them neighborhoods in Houston. I'm from a couple of, well, the roughest areas in Houston. And, yeah, it's not really surprising at all, as sad as it is to say. There are people there who, you know, a lot like in New Orleans too, where when time comes that National Guard and law enforcement are going to be swarming the area, they, and, you know, possibly much of their illegal shit, you know, they need to get it out. And, you know, somebody rescuing other people on a boat looks like a victim to them. Looks like the perfect opportunity for them to be able to get their stuff, whatever it is they're hiding, you know, whatever their business is, and get the hell out of there. It's like my broadcast's having problems. I mean, you know, thanks to the one person, if you are an actual person watching. No offense, but I wouldn't be shocked if it was a bot. Oh, look, it's gone green. So anyways, this guy's out here. Looks like the rain's picking up. Rain's supposed to be hitting me sometime soon. Maximo. Cool, I was thinking about you before I got online. I was inspecting my cultures earlier. Just contemplating. Fuck. Do I need more rotifers? Looks like my rotifers crashed while I was at Magna. But then, upon further inspection of the cultures, basically my backup plan was successful. And where there once were rotifers, there are now just pods coming out of the ass. And I might think I have a better thing going here. I mean, like, I kind of want more rotifers. It's $24 shipped for them. But I almost want to try it one time. Try to raise one batch of clownfish on just the parvicolanus copepods. I don't know. I don't know if I have the volume, though. Is the thing. The rotifers will grow in a much denser culture. You can have basically about 20 per milliliter in there. Adults. And basically, the way I had that culture set up is if I fed it more, the rotifers would take over. If I fed it less, the pods would take over. But man, those pods they're really not very sensitive. They don't really give a shit. I mean, the water, like I overfed both of those bottom cultures. The top culture's fine. It's just got like billions of parvo in it. But the bottom two cultures are clouded up because they got overfed. And I pulled samples out of each one, inspected them under my magnifying scope, whatever, microphoning glass. And still plenty of shit. Just parvicolanus, just pods, breeding and like mated, like joined up and everything, like squiggling around. Now I wish I could get a camera to show that on the videos. That'd be pretty cool. But yeah, tonight's hatch night for the current batch of eggs on the rock, I think. I haven't really been tracking this one because we went to Magna and all. And sure as hell didn't have time to prep the incubator today. I still don't know if there's any stomatellas in there. I harvested a bunch of stomatella eggs and sperm and put them in there. Basically filled up the water with that shit when they spawned. And the reason why I'm not sure if there's any in there is because it kind of caused like a massive decomposition problem and the water got really, really cloudy. So I don't know if everything died in there. But the water's nice and clear now. I got the bubble filter in there and the water's cleared up just fine. I don't know. Maybe I'd be able to. If those eggs are still on the pot tomorrow, I'm going to pull them. I'm going to balance out the salinity, or maybe cross flow this, and get the salinity balanced out in that incubator. And then I'll just pull the bubble filter and hatch them in there without rinsing it out. And maybe I'll have stomatella babies and percula babies growing in the same incubator. What do you think of that? That'd be cool. Stomatella babies and percula babies. And maybe I might have a thing. Maybe if I could find just the right mollusk to be a helper cleanup crew in the bottom of an incubator tank, I can keep it a lot cleaner and have less of a pollution problem. Maybe stomatellas wind up being the answer. It's kind of cool when like the reef keeping hobby in general, the people who find the greatest success are the ones who buy animals based on the need. You know, not like you're using that animal to keep your reef clean or something like that. But understanding its place in the ecosystem and trying to complete your ecosystem and make, every aspect of input and output balance out. And, usually the other side of the equation is how much you can protein skim. But apart from the protein skimming, it's, just supposed to be your biological processes, including your mollusks, your crustaceans, your copepods, amphipods, and even of course, the bacteria and other microscopic life that processes, like, just fish poo. It's all about processing the fish poo. See, stomatella eats the algae that the fish poo grows into. And I would think that a stomatella would tear up the phytoplankton that settles on the bottom of the incubator. Anyways. So what the hell are you doing up? What time is it over there by you? You just waking up? What's good with you, Maximo? I'm bored, and the whole Trump-Russia thing is heating up, and like, I could put the video on and really enjoy watching that right now, but I don't know if I should. What do you think? Think I should abstain? I don't know. It is pretty good, and she did give a little relevant tribute to the storm victims down here. So maybe I'll just put Matto on. Maybe just Matto. Yeah. Oh look, there it is. 41:45. They have a longer clip. And last word, 44:25. 35? What the hell? Alright. Maybe this. I'll just go ahead and put the fucking big one on. It's a little mini clip thing. I want a full screen video, damn it. Alright, here we go. And yeah, it's getting pretty damn good, man.
Hard to overstate the magnitude of the crisis in Texas. Houston is the country's 4th largest city. It's also the fastest growing major city in America. And even though Houston has been hit by disastrous flooding in the past, including flooding caused by hurricanes, the rapid growth and sprawl in the Houston area has created worse conditions for a storm like this. It's also created some seemingly insurmountable challenges in terms of trying to move people out of harm's way and trying to rescue people when the effort to get them out of harm's way is a failed effort. So we're continuing to watch this story tonight. We're going to be getting a live report from Houston in just a moment. We're also going to be speaking with an expert tonight, who's an expert specifically on the question of what options Houston has right now, what options Texas has right now in the middle of this thing to cope with what has happened over the last 4 days and what is likely to continue to get worse over the next 48 hours. They have some very painful decisions to make, and getting a sense of what options they have and what the consequences of their decisions might be at this point. It's very difficult stuff, but we're going to be covering that in detail tonight. Today's also seen a cascade of breaking news, some fairly stunning breaking news about the Trump Organization and the Trump campaign and its ties to Russia at the time that Russia was attacking the U.S. presidential election last year. Carol Leonnig is one of the investigative reporters of the Washington Post who broke this story open both over the weekend and then today. Carol Leonnig is going to join us live here in just a moment. We've also got a little bit of news to break tonight on the Trump-Russia dossier. The dossier that was prepared by former British MI6 agent Christopher Steele last year, that dossier of alleged Russian dirt on Donald Trump that was published by BuzzFeed in January, created such an uproar at the time. The people who commissioned that dossier have described it as a roadmap for the investigation into whether or not Trump colluded with the Russian attack. People who commissioned that dossier also stand by it and say that the dossier is correct. That dossier is now back at the center of what we know about the Trump-Russia investigation. We're going to be breaking a little bit of news on that later in the show this evening. But you know, the day that we, the public, all first learned about the dossier was actually before the election. It was on October 31st, Halloween 2016. David Corn at Mother Jones Magazine was the first person in the country to break the news that a former Western intelligence agent had collected a series of intelligence reports that were potentially very damaging to Donald Trump, specifically in terms of his relationship with Russia. David Corn reported on Halloween, just before the election, that the FBI had seen these findings and was looking into them. Again, that report, October 31st, 2016. Nobody quite knew what to make of it at the time. I wish that I had known what to make of it at the time. I wish we all had, right? It really wasn't until the dossier itself was published months later in January, after the election, that we all learned how serious this thing was that David Corn had been describing in October. But on that same day that David Corn published that prescient story, right, the story that in retrospect now appears to be so important, but at the time we didn't really get it. On that same day, there was another really big, hard to understand story that kind of landed the same way. It was written by Franklin Foer at Slate.com. He wrote a long piece that was published on Halloween that described unusual computer interactions between a computer server in Trump Tower, serving the Trump Organization, and a computer server in Moscow associated with a big Russian bank called Alpha Bank. And what this Slate article described was kind of hard to put your finger on in terms of its significance, but the granular reporting was that there was an unusually high volume of server-to-server communications of some kind between those two servers in Moscow and Trump Tower, and there was no reporting on what the content of those communications were. I mean, there were ultimately multiple competing explanations offered as to why those servers might have been communicating with each other, but it was honestly really never explained in terms of what the significance of that information was. And because of that, because it didn't have a clear bottom line, it was just like I think ultimately that story kind of withered away in the public consciousness. Whatever the reason was, why the Trump Organization computer servers and Alpha Bank's computer servers were talking to each other during the campaign, it's interesting, but we didn't know what it meant, and there didn't seem to be any other notable connection between Donald Trump and Alpha Bank. So, interesting story. We don't really know what it means, and the whole thing kind of went to the back of the stack in terms of things to worry about when it comes to Donald Trump and Russia.
Should ask me.
You know, maybe that whole Alpha Bank server thing was just a coincidence or just some technical glitch. That story came out October 31st on Slate.com. Then, a week later, Donald Trump won the election. And then during the transition, when he was president-elect, there emerged the next weird, inexplicable, maybe coincidental thing involving Trump World and a Russian bank. One of the numerous contacts with Russian officials that Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner did not disclose on his request for a security clearance was a meeting that he took at Trump Tower during the transition, where he hosted the head of another Russian bank. Jared Kushner met with the head of a Russian bank that's called VEB Bank. VEB Bank is a bank, but it's really just an entity of the Russian government. The leadership of VEB Bank is handpicked by Vladimir Putin. And VEB Bank's connections with Russian intelligence in particular are not subtle. Sergei Gorkov is the guy who Jared Kushner met with at Trump Tower during the transition. He's a graduate of the FSB Academy, which basically means he went to KGB grad school. VEB Bank was also the cover organization for a big Russian spy ring that was busted up by the FBI a few years ago. That was the Russian spying operation where Trump foreign policy advisor Carter Page was found by the FBI to have been essentially a willing target for those Russian spies. At least he was a source of information for those Russian spies who were looking for Americans to give them information to help them with their spying efforts against America from their home base in New York, where they were ostensibly working for VEB Bank, but really they were spies. So there was the Alpha Bank servers communicating with the Trump organization for some reason. What's that Russian bank got to do with anything? Then in the transition, there's Jared Kushner meeting with the head of VEB Bank for some reason. What's that Russian bank got to do with it? Then, not long after Trump got inaugurated, along comes another inexplicable, seemingly random intersection between Trump world and yet another Russian bank. The next one we learned about was, I think, the biggest Russian bank of all, a bank called Sberbank, which announced in March that they had hired new counsel to represent them in a big, complicated civil case that was filed in federal court in New York, in which the Sberbank was accused, basically, of rigging the granite mining industry in Russia. Why is that a federal civil case in New York? It's a long story. But in March, Sberbank, in the middle of this case, they kind of surprised everybody. They made a lot of eyebrows arch in the legal news when they announced that they had chosen their new counsel for that long, complicated, and presumably very expensive case. And they said their new counsel was going to be Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Mark Kasowitz. Right? Mark Kasowitz is supposed to be heading up President Trump's legal representation on the Russia investigation. I mean, if you're the lead lawyer coordinating legal defense for the President of the United States who is facing a major counterintelligence and criminal investigation from the FBI while he is serving as president, if you're in charge of that, you think you'd be too busy to take on other clients, right? But, you know, looking at it from another angle, if there were Russian interests who were particularly concerned to know what was going on in the Trump-Russia investigation, it might also be handy to have conversations under cover of attorney-client privilege with the lead lawyer for the president on the Trump-Russia investigations. So, who knows? Maybe that was just a coincidence, too. What's that big Russian bank doing with the president's Russia lawyer? So, I mean, maybe the Alpha Bank thing was just a coincidence. Maybe the VEB Jared Kushner meeting was just a coincidence. Maybe the Sberbank thing, hiring Donald Trump's Russia lawyer, maybe it was all just a coincidence. Maybe none of this has anything to do with President Donald Trump and whether or not he has some sort of illicit relationship, financial or otherwise, with Russia that explains why Russia attacked our election and tried to rig it on his behalf, right? Maybe none of those bank connections, Alpha Bank, VEB Bank, Sberbank, maybe none of those have anything to do with the question of whether Trump and his campaign knew about or were involved with the Russian effort to disrupt our election. I mean, if you want to talk about Donald Trump personally and specifically, honestly, until today, the only big and sort of suspicious banking relationship we've known about him, at least recently, isn't with any Russian bank. It's with Deutsche Bank, right? Which, as the name implies, is not Russian. Deutsche Bank, still to this day, is the bank that Donald Trump owes hundreds of millions of dollars to. Deutsche Bank is the bank that dealt with Donald Trump in business terms for years when no other major banks would. Deutsche Bank is the bank that continued to lend President Trump hundreds of millions of dollars for various deals, even after he was unable to pay them back on some of his earlier loans, even after he went so far as to file lawsuits against Deutsche Bank because he failed to pay them back, which is a certain kind of hubris. There are aspects of the Donald Trump-Deutsche Bank relationship that have always seemed unexplained by the bounds of normal financial business dealings. Deutsche Bank, at least on the surface, appears to have been uncommonly generous to him and forgiving of him. Deutsche Bank also, it turns out, gave Jared Kushner several $100 million in loans. In October October of last year, right before the election. Loans that Jared Kushner personally guaranteed, which made it all the more unusual that he failed to disclose those loans from Deutsche Bank on his financial disclosure statement. Hundreds of millions of dollars. Deutsche Bank has also been plagued over the last year by its legal liability for a multi-billion-dollar Russian money laundering scheme that was operated out of Deutsche Bank offices in Moscow and London and elsewhere. But after today, the Deutsche Bank Russian money laundering case will no longer be seen as the most concerning Deutsche Bank connection for President Trump when it comes to the Trump-Russia investigation. Because there was Alpha Bank with the server thing, there was VEB Bank with the Carter Page connection, and then the Jared Kushner meeting. There's Sberbank hiring Trump's Russia lawyer. Right? There's all these Russian banks that are getting strange new starring roles in American politics. There's another one, turns out. Alpha Bank, VEB Bank, Sberbank. There's another one called VTB Bank. It is a very large Russian bank. It's not as big as Sberbank, but it's really big. VTB Bank is sanctioned by the U.S. government because of Russia invading Crimea. This bank got sanctioned by the U.S. government as punishment for Crimea because this bank is seen as the Russian government. It's an arm of the Russian government, and that's how the U.S. government views them. In fact, if you go to VTB's website tonight, you go click on About VTB, and they will tell you in exact mathematical terms how they are controlled by the Russian government. The Russian government owns and controls 60.9% of VTB Bank. The majority shareholder of the VTB Bank is the Russian government, which owns 60.9% of the voting shares. What that means in plain English is that Putin runs VTB. Putin controls the bank and what it does and what it spends on. And today, we learned that up until last year, up until the middle of the presidential campaign, VTB Bank was lined up and committed to provide hundreds of millions of dollars in financing to build Trump Tower Moscow. The Russian government was going to do that deal. Actually, even without the knowledge that the financing for this deal was going to come from the Russian government, it's still a heck of a bombshell. Right? This is not some old deal that happened back in the past that people might have forgotten about. This is not something Trump worked on in the 90s and it fell apart. This was what he was working on during the campaign, after he announced that he was running for president, months into his presidential campaign, when he was full on running for president. He was trying to do this deal with the Russian government in Moscow. Quoting from Carol Lenig's story on this in the Washington Post, quote, as the talks to build Trump Tower Moscow progressed, Trump voiced numerous supportive comments about Vladimir Putin on the campaign trail, setting himself apart from his Republican rivals for the nomination. Remember when Trump warned a few weeks ago in that interview with the New York Times that if Robert Mueller wanted to go looking into any of his business dealings, that would be crossing a red line because clearly none of those personal, financial interests or business dealings had anything to do with Russia? That'd be crossing a red line. Well, now we know that his business, the Trump Organization, had everything to do with Russia, even during the campaign. And, we probably should have seen this coming. Back in May, we should have seen this coming when Donald Trump's lawyers started hiring their own lawyers. Michael Cohen, forever and a day, has been Donald Trump's lawyer. He's been his personal lawyer at times. He's been a Trump Organization executive and lawyer. When Trump started flirting with and then actually running for president in this past election cycle, Michael Cohen was his top, and for most of the time, his only political advisor. Michael Cohen is very, very, very close to Trump and Trump's business. He is Trump's lawyer, and he did hire his own lawyer this spring. He then confirmed that the committees investigating the Trump-Russia affair had asked him to give testimony and to hand over documents to those committees. Michael Cohen's response to those requests was, no, I won't. The committees then subpoenaed him to testify and also to hand over documents. He is due, as far as we know, to testify next week on Tuesday to the House Intelligence Committee. But apparently today he handed over documents to the House Intelligence Committee, and some of those documents and a long statement about them found their way to certain reporters and publications upon the handover of these documents to Congress. And just to read between the lines here a little bit, it does not appear that what happened here is that Michael Cohen handed stuff over to Congress and Congress leaked it. I'm not speaking from direct knowledge here. I am speaking in terms of reading between the lines. The way that this is phrased and described in the reporting tonight is that Michael Cohen handed this stuff over to the House Intelligence and in so doing, gave some of it to reporters and a statement about it to reporters to put the best possible spin on that information himself before investigators themselves can start chewing on it and putting it out in their own terms. I mean, and in this case, the best possible spin is still pretty bad, right? The bottom line of what we've learned now from the Washington Post and the Times is that while Trump was insisting publicly that he had no deals with Russia, and why he was questioned repeatedly about why he was being so bent over backwards positive about Vladimir Putin and Russia throughout the campaign, he never thought to mention, and apparently nobody in the Trump organization or the Trump campaign ever thought to mention, that during the presidential campaign for 5 months of the presidential campaign, the Trump organization was aggressively pursuing the building of a gigantic real estate project in Moscow that the Russian government had agreed to finance. Those negotiations included in October Trump signing a letter of intent to proceed with the project, October 2015. Michael Cohen says he spoke to Trump at least 3 times directly about the project. Michael Cohen, we now know, also wrote directly to the Kremlin last January. He wrote to Vladimir Putin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, to ask for direct Kremlin help in restarting discussions about the building project, which by then he said was stalled. The other Trump organization figure involved in these negotiations is someone we've talked about before, named Felix Sater. He's a Russian-born ex-con who was convicted of a $40 million mafia-connected pump-and-dump stock scheme. In 2013, Trump, in a sworn deposition, professed to not be able to recognize Felix Sater if he had been sitting in that room that day. It's a little hard to believe. Felix Sater had been associated with the Trump organization for years. He carried a Trump business card that described himself as senior advisor to Donald Trump. Even after Trump said he wouldn't recognize him if he were in the room, he said that in 2013. By 2015, apparently Felix Sater was recognizable again because he was working with Michael Cohen to try to make this Trump Tower Moscow thing happen. And Trump was signing off on the letter of intent to move forward with it. Michael Cohen, I think, has to testify to House Intel next week. He definitely seems to have handed over documents to House Intel today. His strategy in so doing is to try to spin what he's handed over in the best possible way. It still looks very bad. It also appears to be to try to play down the importance of Felix Sater and his involvement in this project, especially Sater's comments in the emails that have been handed over to Congress now and to some reporters, in which Felix Sater brags that there's something about this real estate deal in Moscow that in the end will result in Donald Trump becoming president of the United States. Quote, our boy can become president of the USA and we can engineer it. I will get all of Putin's team to buy in on this. I will manage this process. Felix Sater wrote this to Michael Cohen, quote, Michael, I arranged for Ivanka to sit in Putin's private chair at his desk and office in the Kremlin. I know how to play it, and we will get this done. Michael Cohen's strategy in releasing these documents to the press, ahead of him giving them to Congress, involves him playing down whether or not Felix Sater really could have been serious about that. He put out a statement that said, quote, over the course of my business dealings with Mr. Sater, he has sometimes used colorful language and has been prone to salesmanship. That said, this is my favorite part of the whole thing. When the Times today went to check out Felix Sater's boast that he was so connected, he could deliver the Putin side of this deal. He was so connected, he was able to arrange for Ivanka Trump to sit in Putin's private chair at his desk in his office in the Kremlin. When the New York Times checked out that boast today, the response from Team Ivanka was not exactly on brand. Ivanka Trump told the Times she did, in fact, take a brief tour of Red Square and the Kremlin when she was in Moscow with Felix Sater, but she insists she was only there, quote, as a tourist. I have to say, though, it does not seem she had a totally typical tourist experience because, quote, she said it is possible she sat in Mr. Putin's chair. But maybe that's just a coincidence. Or don't all tourist visitors to the Kremlin get to sit in Putin's chair? Alpha Bank, then VEB Bank, then Sberbank, now VTB Bank, which is the Russian government, agreeing to finance to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars a Trump Tower Moscow project that no one ever admitted to before today. That was happening during the campaign. Probably all just a coincidence. Trump-Russia investigation is sort of built on three ideas, three questions. One is U.S. intelligence agencies saying the Russian government interfered in the presidential election to try to help Trump win. Two, there are allegations about whether the Trump campaign colluded with or helped the Russians conduct that meddling during the election. And three, there are questions about the absolute denials from our now president that he has anything to do with Russia beyond that one beauty pageant he held there. I mean, the reason his dealings with Russia and his statements about his dealings with Russia are of investigative interest is because investigators need to figure out if there's some way in which he is compromised when it comes to Russia. What that means is investigators need to figure out if Russia holds something over him. Do they know something? Do they have documentation of something that he's done that he would not like them to reveal to the public? Right? That's the essence of being compromised, right? Being beholden. Being in a position where, for some secret reason, you feel the need to ingratiate yourself to a foreign power, or at least to not say no when they come calling. Okay, so it all boils down to this simple stuff. Russia interfered in the election to help Trump win. Proven. The Trump campaign is alleged to have helped in that effort, being investigated. And our now president says he's had nothing to do with Russia. Nothing. That's why this is a heck of a bombshell. Top Trump organization executive asked Putin aid for help on business deal. A top executive from Trump's real estate company emailed Vladimir Putin's personal spokesman during the U.S. presidential campaign last year to ask for help advancing a stalled Trump Tower development project in Moscow. Post says that is according to documents submitted to Congress today by a Trump organization executive who has also been Trump's personal lawyer and who served as Trump's top political advisor for the start of his campaign, while he was having Trump sign a letter of intent to go forward with Trump Tower Moscow to be financed by a Russian government-run bank. Nobody thought to mention this before now. Joining us now is Carol Lanning, reporter for the Washington Post. Carol, thank you very much for being here. It's nice to have you here.
And it's great to be here, Rachel.
So congratulations on this scoop. You guys broke this story yesterday about the Trump organization trying to build a Trump Tower in Moscow early in the campaign. What you report in this story and what the president has said about his dealings with Russia seem to me to be very much at odds. Do you feel like what you've been able to report really contradicts the way the president has characterized his own dealings in Russia?
I don't think it catches him in a horrid, absolute lie. I think what it shows is that he hasn't really been forthright about just how eager he was, while a presidential candidate, to let his at least Trump organization and his executive vice president pursue a very potentially lucrative deal in Moscow. There are debates about how valuable it would be to him, but I think that there's something bigger behind what we've learned in the story that we broke on Sunday night and the news story that we broke this afternoon. I think there's something much bigger in the fabric here, and you kind of only learn it as each piece comes. But that bigger thing is, while Donald Trump's sort of third son, Michael Cohen, he's a longtime friend and ally, not his actual son by birth. But while this person is negotiating a deal in Moscow to develop and license Moscow Trump Tower, a Russian-born friend of his is saying, hey, if we make this deal, the president can get elected. It's going to make him look like such a great, incredible negotiator. And hey, I'm connected in Russia, and I can get Vladimir Putin to start saying nice things about this, kind of distant horse GOP hopeful. Then we learn in our more recent story that at the same time, Michael Cohen, this longtime ally of Donald Trump's, is reaching out to an extremely high-ranking friend of Vladimir Putin's and saying, I'd like your help. We're stalled. We'd like to get this deal done. nudge, nudge, wink, wink. We know how it works in Russia. You need to go to Putin, and says, we'd like your help. So that's a pretty dramatically different thing than what the president has said, which is, I have zero interest in Russia. I have zero deals. I've got nothing going on there.
When Felix Sater connects this deal to Trump's chances at becoming president, is it clear why he sees those two things as connected? You just mentioned that he said that wow, this will really make him look like a great negotiator. I'm not sure I get his argument or the credibility of his argument in terms of why he thought these things were connected. Obviously, it's very provocative to see somebody saying, we're doing this deal and it will result in Trump becoming president. We're doing this financial deal and it'll result in him winning the election. But I don't really get why he was connecting the two ideas.
It could have been incredible braggadocio kind of commentary. It could have been somebody doing something a little bit different. But remember, at this time, Vladimir Putin is pretty angry with the U.S. He views himself on a bit of a revenge mission. And he also wants to look like he has some sort of detente. It appears that he thinks he can create kind of a non-adversarial relationship with Donald Trump, a kind of iconoclastic presidential candidate. And Felix Sater, again, this Russian-born broker who's been long connected with Donald Trump and has introduced him since 2013 to fairly significant Russian money men. This guy is saying, look, this is good for Putin and this is good for you, Donald. I mean, he's telling this to Michael Cohen. You will look like you have negotiated with one of America's toughest adversaries. It happens that that would also be beneficial to Vladimir Putin. He would look like he had sort of a detente, a happy relationship with the U.S.
It's such a bizarre misreading of how it would have been greeted had that deal gone through. That's in terms of just understanding how the news works and how people were treating Trump once we started learning about Russian efforts to get involved in the election. This is such a puzzle, but the fabric here is absolutely stunning. And I have a feeling there's a lot. This feels like the start of a lot of reporting in terms of us getting to understand this part of the campaign. Carol Lennick for the Washington Post. Really appreciate your time tonight. Congratulations again on this scoop.
Thanks, Rachel.
All right. The city of Houston today has been making some very hard choices about how to manage the absolutely epic flooding that has inundated that major American city. We've got a really good expert to ask about this stuff. That story's ahead, plus the latest from Houston, plus that little bit of news we're going to break on the Russia dossier. That's all ahead tonight. Stay with us. Houston, Texas is basically flat. It's America's fourth largest city. It has an elevation of 50 feet. Houston is in a flat and watery part of the world with the Gulf of Mexico on one side and bayous running all through the city. Since 1960, Houston has suffered more deaths and property loss from flooding than any other locality in the country. And the people of Houston have developed ways of trying to keep the water from winning. Today, with this huge storm, they tried one of their more desperate measures. There are two big dams on the west side of Houston that hold back reservoirs that are designed basically to keep water upstream from Houston proper, to keep that water from rushing into what are now the already flooded bayous in downtown Houston. This is how those reservoirs looked before the storm. After the storm, the water had begun rising high enough and fast enough that officials feared the dams themselves would be overcome. So to save the dams, to keep holding back the gigantic quantities of water held in those reservoirs, they opened the spillways enough to let some of the water out of those reservoirs. In so doing, they flooded the neighborhoods in the path of that water that they had to let out. And they didn't do it gratuitously. They did it as a way to save the dams, to save more people. It's the kind of difficult choice no mayor, no engineer ever wants to have to make. Might have been the best choice they had today in Houston, though. How do you manage a catastrophe like this when not only is it underway, it is not ending anytime soon? What are Houston's options right now in responding to the continuing flooding? What should they do over the next couple of days? We're going to be joined next by somebody whose job it is to grapple with these exact questions. Stay with us.
News.
just breathe. We've seen the president lawyer up.
Intense questions on the wake of this investigation.
Rosita Dimitrov's family was rescued by boat this afternoon.
The house is flooding, and it's rising way too fast.
They live just west of Houston, where in an unprecedented move, the Army Corps of Engineers is doing controlled releases from 2 reservoirs before the storm even moves away. It's an effort to reduce the risk of destructive flooding and lessen the chances of dams bursting.
We were fine until they released the reservoirs. So everything started happening really fast this morning. Not yet, no. The waters were rising, but we were flooded before this. So I understand they have to do what they have to do to see Houston, but that really triggered and accelerated the process.
They have to do what they have to do to save Houston. I was reporting on NBC Nightly News tonight about a family directly affected by the controlled release of those 2 reservoirs today. Local officials actually warning today that even on day 4 of this disaster in Houston, people who are not flooded yet may yet find that they are flooded tomorrow or the next day as the effects of the storm continue to crescendo and as officials make hard decisions. Joining us now is Jim Blackburn. He's co-director of the Speed Center at Rice University in Houston. The Speed Center was established 10 years ago to address severe storms and their impact on the Gulf Coast area. Professor Blackburn, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm glad you're able to be with us.
Well, thank you, Rachel. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Today, the Army Corps of Engineers decided to open spillways at those 2 reservoirs west of Houston, west of the downtown. As far as I understand it, basically as a way to save the dams, to preserve the integrity of those reservoirs, to save a greater amount of people. The short-term result is that some neighborhoods face new or worsened flooding. You've studied these things. You know the options they have. What do you make of that decision they made today?
Well, that decision is based on these dams being evaluated as 2 of the 6 most dangerous in the United States by the Corps. That's both in terms of risk of failure and the population affected downstream. We've never seen this much rain before, and they made, I think, the prudent decision, although very difficult decision, to go ahead and begin to release water while also filling up the reservoir. But I don't think the reservoirs are intended to be used to full capacity, which is really a tragedy because we need every ounce of flood control that we've got.
In terms of the flood control options that local officials have, what kind of tools do they have at their disposal? What kind of decisions are they going to be making today, tonight, tomorrow, as this storm continues to play out?
But I think we've really got some of the most difficult decisions, and I would say these are decisions that frankly we'll be facing, I think, every coastal city in the future. We've never seen a rain like this. On the other hand, there's a lot of options that Houston has really never seriously considered before. We've always approached flooding from the standpoint of quote-unquote controlling it, primarily with engineering solutions. And there are a lot of non-structural alternatives out there. We're going to have to pull out a whole new bag of approaches that require creativity and that require, really trying to come up with new and different ways of solving these problems. We cannot solve these problems by thinking the way that we've been thinking. We've got to come up with better new ideas.
Given not only the size of Houston, but its critical location, things like the Houston Ship Channel and the oil refineries there and all the infrastructure there, some of which is it can be quite dangerous to human beings and other forms of life when it is put in danger. Given what Houston is and what's at risk here, what's been in the way of Houston coming up with better decisions to deal with flooding? It is very striking that a city with that much chemical and oil infrastructure is also the most flooded locality in the United States.
Well, I think, first of all, it's sometimes difficult to get the officials to really envision the magnitude of storms that we actually are foreseeing. But we've foreseen, for example, something that didn't happen in this storm, which would be a hurricane with a large surge, perhaps 20 to 25 feet, coming in and hitting the Houston Ship Channel. And I've had several people tell me that's unrealistic. If we had modeled and presented the scenario that is unfolding, we would have been accused of coming up with unrealistic future scenarios. So I think one thing is trying to get people to to really be open-minded about what the risks are, because I think we're really at a time of unprecedented risk. With the heat, the Gulf of Mexico is extremely warm, among the warmest, if not the warmest, of the oceans of the world, and it is a virtual heat pump into a hurricane, and that is a huge source of power for these storms.
Professor Blackburn, I read in ProPublica that since 1989, what they call a 100-year storm, a storm that's only supposed to happen once in 100 years. Since 1989, that's happened 6 times in Houston. Are you saying that this isn't just a Houston issue, this is a climate change issue in terms of how we anticipate the magnitude of storms and flooding?
It's exactly the type of thing that the experts on climate have been predicting, in the sense that our normal distribution of storms is changing and will be skewing to more severe events. And that is, I think, exactly what we're seeing. We've seen 2 500-year storms in the last 2 years in certain parts of town. And I have no idea what this storm is going to evaluate at, but certainly way beyond a 100-year storm. I think the term 100-year rainfall is virtually meaningless today, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency is the one that comes up with these storm amounts. We have got to reevaluate our severe storms, and I think this affects everybody in the United States. I think Houston has a chance to be a trendsetter for the country in figuring out how to cope and deal with these kind of new, unprecedented storm events, but it's going to take every bit of creativity that we have.
Jim Blackburn, co-director of the Speed Center at Rice University in Houston. Thank you for helping us understand all this. This has been very sobering coming from you, sir. Appreciate you being here.
I really appreciate your taking the time, Rachel.
Thank you. All right. We got more ahead tonight. Stay with us. I was off on Friday night. Sorry. Not sorry. But at the height of Friday's hurricane-themed news dump, we learned that President Trump was granting a pardon to former Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio. That was Friday. By late Saturday morning, new reporting opened up a whole new question about that for the White House. The Washington Post cited 3 sources in reporting on Saturday that last spring, months before Sheriff Arpaio's case even went to trial, the president looked into quashing the Arpaio prosecution altogether. He, quote, asked Attorney General Jeff Sessions whether it would be possible for the government to drop the criminal case against Arpaio, but the president was advised that would be inappropriate. A short time later, the New York Times published its own version of the story, citing 4 sources. They reported that the president brought up the possibility of quashing the Arpaio prosecution, not just with Attorney General Jeff Sessions, but also with the White House counsel. Okay, here's my question. If the president asked the AG and the White House counsel if they could maybe drop the Arpaio prosecution somehow, is that potentially a legal problem for the president? Where's the line between, hey, I'm just asking for a friend, and obstructing justice? We got some expert advice on that today. Former U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuaid, she's an MSNBC chief contributor now. You've seen her here on our show numerous times. Tonight, Barbara McQuaid tells us that this could be a separate count of obstruction of justice against the president if the president tried to interfere with the prosecution. That's being investigated in terms of the Comey firing. Conceivably, that could also be investigated or pursued in this case. She also told us this, which is very interesting, quote, if Sessions or anybody else explained to Trump that it is inappropriate to interfere with a criminal investigation before Trump attempted to do so with former FBI Director James Comey, that could help establish that Trump understood that what he was doing in firing James Comey was illegal. So in other words, this might get rid of his ignorance defense. If the president was told explicitly that he is really not allowed to interfere in a criminal investigation of Joe Arpaio, then he was in a position to know explicitly that he shouldn't interfere in the FBI investigation of Michael Flynn by pressuring James Comey about that. So that's what we heard from former federal prosecutor Barbara McQuaid. We also asked Bob Bauer today, former White House counsel under President Obama. He cited the unusual nature of the Arpaio pardon coming before Sheriff Arpaio was even sentenced. He told us, quote, should the president ever face impeachment on obstruction-related grounds, this will color the case against him because it's a pardon that does not meet the standards for granting one in the normal course of events. So again, yes, asking about the Arpaio pardon could be trouble for the president. We also heard from a former top official in the Justice Department, Walter Dellinger, who led the Office of Legal Counsel under President Clinton. Walter Dellinger told us, quote, No president should be interfering in a criminal prosecution on behalf of friends or supporters. It fundamentally violates equal justice under law. Blunt from Walter Dellinger. So, obviously, a pardon is a presidential prerogative, but can a president try to quash a prosecution? Is that legal? Turns out it's a good question, so stay tuned on that. We also have some exclusive new reporting tonight on the dossier of alleged Russian dirt on President Trump and the 10 hours of testimony by a key player in the production of that dossier. We've got last week, the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley, got asked by a very persistent, very bright constituent at an Iowa town hall. The question that he faced was about the controversial dossier that first detailed collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. The head of the company that commissioned that dossier, the co-founder of Fusion GPS, Glenn Simpson, he spent 10 hours giving a transcribed interview to Judiciary Committee staffers recently, all about the dossier, 10 hours of testimony. Afterward, Glenn Simpson said he stands by the dossier. He also said, quote, the committee can release the transcript if it so chooses. Transcript of 10 hours of his testimony on the dossier. At that town hall in Iowa, Senator Grassley told his persistent constituent that he was opening to releasing that transcript of those 10 hours of testimony if his committee voted to do that. So here's what we can report tonight. Judiciary has 11 Republicans and 9 Democrats. We think all 9 Democrats would likely vote to release that transcript. We reached out to all of them as well as to all the Republicans on the committee. One of the Republicans who isn't the chairman, Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah, tells us now that he would vote to release that transcript. Quoting from a statement that his office gave us, quote, the senator, like Chairman Grassley, believes we should make as much public as possible and as soon as we can. Barring additional and unexpected developments, he would vote in favor. So says Orrin Hatch's office. That's interesting. It means if one more Republican votes to release that transcript, that would mean those 10 hours of testimony about the dossier by the guy who commissioned it, who stands by the dossier, absolutely, those 10 hours of testimony may soon see the light of day, which would really be something. Watch this space. This does it for us tonight. We will see you again tomorrow. Now it's time for the last word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening,
Rachel. And let me add one sort of senatorial courtesy point to what you just said, which I think makes it a pretty certain proposition that you're going to see those transcripts. Orrin Hatch is the senior-most Republican serving in the Senate. He's been there for 40 years. He's actually the longest-serving Republican senator in history, and he believes in Senate traditions, protocols, courtesies. He would never have said that without checking with Chairman Chuck Grassley.
So you think that Hatch saying that and saying it the way he did means that both Hatch and Grassley would vote to release the transcript?
Well, what it absolutely means is Grassley has no problem with Orrin Hatch saying that. It doesn't necessarily mean that Grassley's going to join him, but it probably means there are others who will come along. And also, Orrin Hatch used to be the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Chuck Grassley has complete respect for Orrin Hatch in this matter, and Hatch would never do something that Chairman Grassley doesn't want him to do in that committee.
Can you imagine if we're going to get the transcript of all 10 hours of that testimony, all on the dossier from the guy who knows enough about it to say, I stand by it, and he just spent 10 hours defending it?
You know what I'm worried about? I'm worried about what time we're going to get the transcript.
Yeah.
Like, Rachel, say it's like, I don't know, 8:30 p.m.
Yeah.
For example, just as a way of ruining your life.
I'll just tell you, if it comes out after dinner time on the East Coast, what I commit to doing out of
the autoplay. Music or
Republican senator in history, and he believes in Senate traditions, protocols, courtesies. He would never have said that without checking with Chairman Chuck Grassley. So you think that Hatch saying it the way he did, means that both Hatch
I fell asleep.
what it absolutely means is Grassley has with Orrin Hatch saying that. It doesn't necessarily mean that Grassley's going to join him, but it probably means there are others who will come along. And also, Orrin Hatch used to be the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Chuck Grassley has complete respect for Orrin Hatch in this matter, and Hatch would never do something that Chairman Grassley doesn't want him to do in that committee. Can you imagine if we're going to get the transcript of all 10 hours of that testimony, all on the dossier from the guy who knows enough about it to say, I stand by it, and he just spent 10.
Alright. Well, I fell asleep.
Takes my pain back to breathe out of another